Welcome to YLC, the Young Leaders Committee that promotes and grows youth leadership that ensures the future leaders lead from today by educating and inspiring them to soar higher and higher.
Welcome to YLC, the Young Leaders Committee, the platform that educates, enlightens, inspires, and walks young people into leadership from their youth. Young people, your leadership era has started. No longer wait for tomorrow. In our last session, we slightly mentioned risk assessment. We will give greater attention to it in this session. So our focus in this episode is appraising risks. Appraising risks. We decided to use appraising risks instead of the more professional term risk assessment. We will use both terms interchangeably, even though there may be slight semantic differences. Risk assessment is fundamental to risk management. YLC will run a professional training on risks sometime in the future. I will limit myself, therefore, to some things that are not quite professional and technical, just to sensitize, encourage you, and to keep you abreast of some of the things you are likely to face and what you need to do. Let's look at what is risk assessment. Risk assessment is that management or organizational activity that helps the organization to identify the hazards that exist in their workplace, as well as how they may put the workers at risk if nothing is done. It helps them to determine if they have done enough to protect their manpower, materials, and methods. Risk assessment is the appraisal of the nature, level, and potential of risk vis-a-vis your organization's chances of surviving it or navigating past it. It includes a systematic investigation into any possible benefits that may arise from it, what dangers may be involved, and whether your organization can recoup, reorganize, and strategize to keep afloat and remain viable. A risk assessment is a process used to identify potential hazards and to analyze what could happen if a disaster or hazard occurs. There are numerous hazards to consider, and each hazard could have many possible scenarios happening within or because of it. So let's now go on to the next one. Decide when to do your assessment and how. When do I do my assessment and how? Risk assessment should not be taken for granted. Do it whether formally or informally, depending on the nature and size of your organization. It could be done before you commence operation or at the initial stage, depending on the number of considerations, which we will not handle in this session. For small organizations that have a measure of internal safety mechanisms, the head or management team could handle risk assessment. Bigger and more professional organizations are usually advised to get experts to handle that for them. Be sure that we at YLC can be of immense help to you in such circumstances. Let's now delineate the essence of risk assessment. Why have a risk assessment? Again, we urge you to do risk assessment, even if it is for the fun of it, as a friend of mine would say. There are a number of reasons why you should consider doing it, and possible benefits to derive from doing risk assessment. Among the possible benefits are to maintain operational effectiveness and business continuity if your organization enters the storm. Again, to protect your organization's assets, its workers' interests and fortune, as well as those of stakeholders. Thirdly, to assure and promote customer satisfaction and loyalty. The next one is to realize greater benefits and achieve set goals rather than fold up or suffer immeasurable loss. There is yet another, according to our theme, usually when risks are well managed, they yield increased profitability. Why should you do risk assessment? To encourage workers to dare the storm because they have been pre-informed and not be discouraged in the event of a negative outcome. And finally, it prepares you to tackle the risk that eventually come. Then you will not be caught napping. Risk assessment will help us to determine the level of risk, and you need to know the level of risk. It is important and very important to correctly envisage the level of risk and how to mitigate the outcomes if the situation eventually comes out as envisaged. Someone has this to offer in this regard, and I will refer to him. Part of risk assessment is to determine the level of risk that hazards pose to workers and the system, or even others outside the organization. Rate the risks in these three categories: high, medium, low. You can use any terminology, but this is somebody's opinion. This will help you to decide which risks are most serious and should be given priority attention. To help evaluate the risk level, try to answer the following questions. Who might be harmed if it eventually turns out negative? What kind of harm or loss could be suffered, and how severe would it be most likely? How long will workers be exposed to the hazard? The longer the exposure, generally, the higher the risk. And then one more question. How frequent is the exposure? If the task is repeated many times a day, it usually carries more risk than a task done only occasionally. Next is to determine who will be affected. Who will be affected, and what is that person's position and significance in the organization? Your team needs to know who could be at risk, the workers' chances of survival, knowledge and competence in handling the situation, and the position of the staff in the organization. This is usually considered against the level of risk involved and success rate of management. If the person who is to put out the fire is the person who is at risk, or who will be at risk, then you have to make a plan B for eventuality. Decide on possible remedy and do that in advance. When an organization successfully assesses risks, analyzes them, and also has the professional competence to handle them, then there should be strategies on ground to extinguish any flames or douse tensions that emanate from the expected negative outcome. To do so effectively demands expertise and objectivity, especially as there could be different types of remedy in place ahead of delving into risks. Decipher what it will cost. Envisage the likely cost of this outcome. Proper and accurate assessment should ordinarily throw up possible costs, different types of costs. There are two broad categories: the opportunity costs and the direct costs. This should be envisaged and planned for. Please avoid presumption as much as possible. Finally, we want to say devise strategy to avert, to avoid, to ameliorate, and to accommodate the risk. This is key. We might say it is the fundamental reason for risk assessment. Thank you very much for watching. Young Leaders Committee is a mentoring group for young people who are into leadership or who are not even into leadership. It promises potentials and opportunities for encountering all classes of young people and turning them around for excellence. Registration has commenced. The earlier you get registered, the brighter your chances. You can use the link on the screen or visit our website www.getdamconsult.com to register. It's free. Thanks. See you at the next session.